Hello, welcome to the show today. My guest is a talented game developer who's here to talk about his latest project called Kaiju Combat. So, let's get straight down to it. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Simon Strange, thank you
Hello.
very much for coming on the show.
Oh, it's great to be on the show. Thank you for inviting me.
Now, first off, let's talk a little bit about yourself. What got you into the game industry?
Let's see. In 1998, I was a senior in college, and it was sort of the height of the tech boom, and I was very technically proficient, and so I never really worried about getting a job after I graduated. And so just a few months before graduation, I started to think, oh, maybe I should actually find a job, right? That's probably what people should do. And so I started looking around, and I had a friend who was working at a game development house in New York City. And I had never even considered making video games as a career, but as soon as I heard that that's what he was doing, I was like, oh, I could totally do that. And I got very excited, and I applied for a job at the company he was working at, and I got the job, and I've been making video games ever since. I've never had any other position.
So, what would you say is like the hardest part of being in the gaming industry?
Ooh. Oh, there are so many good answers to that question I could give. The hardest part. So, the hardest part about the games industry is that making video games is very technically demanding, and it's also very creatively difficult. It's quite unusual for an endeavor to be difficult in both of those areas. There's a lot of areas, painting, for example, is very creatively difficult, but the idea that you're going to use a brush and apply paint to canvas, like that's been established, right? We've got hundreds of years tradition there. When you shoot a feature film, you don't have to invent a movie camera every time you're going to shoot a feature film. You can just worry about the creative side. On the other side, you have engineering problems where sort of like the physics of the thing are well understood, and you're just like trying to come up with new solutions, and so you're just working on the technical side, but there's not a creative element you need to really worry about. But video games really, they bridge that gap. You have lots of technology you're inventing every day for the games, but you also have this really heavily creative development side. So it's very difficult to make a bounce there. I think that's definitely the hardest part.
So, now you yourself have been in the industry for quite a while now, so what's been like what game have you enjoyed the most making?
Ooh, of the games that I've done personally, I think Rampage Total Destruction was my best development experience. Not necessarily the game that I would enjoy playing the most, because it's really aimed at a younger audience, but that was exciting, because I loved the original Rampage when I was about 8. I played it in arcades all the time. And the idea of being able to, work on a new game in that franchise was very exciting. And I really had a great time just putting in all the silly stuff that I wanted to see in a Rampage game, and it came together very quickly. And we really hit almost no issues during that development process. We made it through certification quickly, and we were the 42nd best-selling game that year, or something, which was pretty exciting. We were just ahead. I remember saw the listing of all the game sales, and we were just ahead of Bully by Rockstar, which came out that same year. And I thought that was a pretty cool achievement. We were ahead of the Rockstar game.
Nice. So with a lot of people trying to get into the industry themselves, what bit of advice would you give someone who's trying to start out?
Well, this is actually a question that I get asked all the time. I like to talk with students, high school students mostly, about how they can get into the games industry. It's a very popular topic of conversation. So here's my stock answer. If you want to work in game development, the most important thing you can do is study writing. Working on your creative writing, working on using language well, expressing yourself clearly, putting your ideas together coherently. That is by far the best thing you can do with your time. Much better than learning programming, much better than studying film, much better than playing a lot of video games. Because the problem that teams have in development is not a lack of ideas. Ideas are easy. Ideas are worthless, frankly. The problem is if you can't communicate and disseminate your ideas so that everyone's working on the same concept, you'll never get a really high-quality thing. So being able to express yourself is really the most important thing. And writing studying writing, it's such a well-known art form, and like the teachers in your schools, they can really make you better at writing. You can even if you think you can't write at all, if you work with your teachers and you do what they say and you put effort into it, you can become a really excellent writer in just a few years, and that will help you immeasurably.
Now, of course, you and your team are currently working on a game called Kaiju Combat.
Yes.
Could you tell us a little bit about the inspiration for the game?
Sure. I think there's no secret that Kaiju Combat is largely a sort of a spiritual successor to the Godzilla games that we made back between 2002 and 2007. We made 3 of them: Godzilla Destroy All Monsters Melee, Godzilla Save the Earth, and Godzilla Unleashed. We also made the Rampage game, as I mentioned earlier. So between those 4 games, I think we are probably the most experienced people anywhere in making games where giant monsters destroy the city. That's kind of our niche that we have fallen into, for better or for worse. And so when people write to me, when people talk to me, when I get fan letters, whatever, like, it's almost always because people have enjoyed those Godzilla games and playing as giant monsters. And so when I was looking at starting my own company, when I was looking at pushing my own projects out there, doing something with giant monsters fighting one another just seemed like the sort of the obvious way to go. And then when we started to look at getting the Godzilla license, and we started looking at, what do people really want, I realized that what people really want is to talk about monsters. And so I thought coming up with a system where people are going to submit their own monsters, and we're going to have just, months and months and years of people talking about monsters and evaluating monsters and having the community vote on the monsters that go into the game and discussing their strengths and weaknesses. I thought that's what people really want to do. So that's what I'm trying to provide for them.
Now, of course, with a brilliant sounding project like that, a lot of people are going to be asking this question: what platform will this game be available on?
Well, since we are a new company and we are not fabulously wealthy, certainly a big concern was to do everything as as cheaply as possible. And when you look at your options, publishing on the PC is incredibly cheap compared to being on consoles. Right now, our development budget for the game, so that means all the money we're paying people for buying all our assets and the sound design and the cinematic, everything we're doing, it's about $300,000. Okay, simply getting all the fees necessary to be on a console is about $250,000. So we would double our budget if we wanted to release on a console. So clearly, if we just want to work on putting out a really excellent game, people can get excited about it, launching on the PC is a natural thing. If the game goes out and makes money and we are successful and we get $250,000 in revenue, it's very straightforward for us to port the thing and put it out on consoles later. So people often ask, when will we get a console release? And I say, well, if things go according to plan, probably a year after launch, we will put ourselves out on consoles if people want that.
Now, one of the things that you said is that people can submit monster designs.
Yes.
How's the response to that been so far?
Incredibly overwhelming. We have almost 4,000 people on our forums, and almost all of them have submitted at least one monster design. We often have 5, 6, 10 monster designs from certain people. We have our 50 progenitors, who are people who donated $500 during the Kickstarter process, and they have already bought a full collaboration process with myself and Matt Frank, our very talented art designer. And so we're working with them. But then we have people who are, with no promise of anything, are just throwing their monster designs out there. And we've already done one sponsorship vote. The idea is that people who can't pay to have their monsters put into the game, we can have other people pay for them, right? So we've collected some extra money. We got enough money for 7 monsters. And we said, okay, we've got 7 monsters worth of development costs collected. So now let's have the whole community come together and vote which of these, 100 monsters that people have put out there recently, which of them do we want to also be able to put in the game? And then we've selected 7. And so obviously there are a lot that are unselected. We have people coming with more monsters all the time. We're going to keep doing more sponsorship votes. We're going to keep offering more opportunities for people to get their monsters kind of into this process. But there's a lot of original monster concepts being thrown around on the Kaiju Combat forums.
Now, speaking of original monsters, of course, you guys are making your own monsters. What's it like coming up with your own personal designs?
Well, we actually have almost done none of that. there are only two monsters that are completely owned by Sunstone Games. That was Uragora and Kikaron, who looks like a giant chicken but is actually an alien gladiator. Those two, Matt and I came up with as sort of the poster children when we were working on this wallpaper as a result of the first Kickstarter. Other than those two, every single monster in the game that we've even talked about or mentioned has been a collaboration with at least one of our fans. And in some cases, a few fans have got together to do these collaborations. And I think it's really important that we're really pushing the fan monsters, because I think that's what people want to see, right? They don't want to give a bunch of money and submit their monster designs for me to put my own monster in the game. They want to see their monsters in the game, so that's what we're doing.
Brilliant. Now, in your Kickstarter video, you said that you wanted to include well-known monsters, just as like Godzilla, Gamera.
Yep.
Do you think you will be able to do that, or?
Oh, yes, absolutely. So this is one of my advantages going into this is working with license holders, especially in Japan. Can be quite tricky. Japanese copyright law is very different from the way copyright and IP ownership works in other countries. I don't know if I should get into that, but it's very challenging to work with Japanese license holders. Okay, it costs a lot of money, and you cannot get a guarantee. People who own things the people who own Godzilla, for example, you could pay them $1 million for the rights to Godzilla, and then they could just turn around and say, "No, I changed my mind," and keep the money. And so that kind of risk is what makes it very scary for a lot of companies. This is when you say, "Oh, why aren't there any good Godzilla games?" It's because you spend a lot of money to get the license, and you have no guarantee the license won't be taken away from you at any time. That's very scary for a lot of people. So you don't get the sort of the big budget games there. But I have many years of experience of working with Toho. I've built up a reputation with them. Matt Frank, our art lead, has also worked with Toho on Godzilla comic books. He's also very trusted by them. So we already have these two different but symbiotic working relationships with Toho. We think we're going to be able to turn that into really building a lot of trust. So we think that we are in a great position to be able to use their licenses and really make it cost effective, so that we, don't end up biting ourselves in the foot.
Is there any apart from any monsters in the Godzilla franchise, is there any monster you would like to see in the game?
Yes, this is a dangerous question. People go nuts over this sort of thing. There are certainly about 4 monsters that we haven't used in the past. So the monster that we've used in the past Godzilla games, I think, are clearly sort of the top priority. I mean, you need King Ghidorah, you need Anguirus, you need Gigan. There are maybe about 4 more Toho monsters that were not in any of the previous Godzilla games, I think are sort of obvious choices. That being, you need Hedorah, you need Monster X, you need Zilla, and then for my 4th, I really think Gabara is kind of something that you really should have in there. Otherwise, I think we've covered the Toho monsters reasonably well. Then you kind of get off into the weeds. You have, Kumanga and other monsters who have sort of a limited role in the Toho universe. But yes, fortunately, all these sorts of roster decisions are out of my hands, because we're very serious about letting the people who have contributed to the game financially, letting them make all these decisions for us. So, in fact, we're gearing up for our first roster vote right now. So, in the first game, we have all these original monster designs. We're saying, all right, so now who's going to be in the game? It's not up to me. It's up to the people who have contributed and pre-ordered the game.
And of course, fans can go to the website to vote for these.
Yes, absolutely.
Now, of course, this game started out on the Kickstarter website, and it was able to meet its goal. How does it feel knowing that you managed to meet the goal with the Kickstarter?
Well, so our first Kickstarter was in July, and so then we launched again in November, and that time we did make our goal. So I've experienced it both ways. Let me tell you, it feels a lot better to make your goal than not. Perhaps not surprisingly. Yeah, we. I don't know. I mean, it's great. I mean, the making the goal and building the community and getting people into the forums. I mean, having thousands of people in the forums talking about the game and getting excited, that's exciting. I find that very rewarding. Uh, I like that people in the forums seem excited to be talking with the developers every day. Like, our lead character artist puts up new models and people talk about them and give him feedback. And I'm talking about game mechanics and we're having votes on things. And Matt Frank comes in and talks about visuals. And I enjoy interacting with our fans in that way, and they seem to really appreciate that as well. So that's definitely the best part. And I think feeding all of that by starting with Kickstarter really makes it apparent that we're valuing community interaction and community involvement.
Now, again, in the Kickstarter video, you said that it's not going to just be one game, it's going to be 4 games, am I correct?
It's, in fact, I'm hoping it'll be 12 games or more.
So what was like the thought process behind splitting it up into these different titles?
Sure. So I call this by a few different names. I call it the multi-release vision, or sometimes modular releases. So here's really the idea. It's all about our desire to include licensed monsters. Okay, so the problem is people want to have Godzilla and Gamera, and they want to fight them against each other. Okay, but that's impossible. You cannot have Godzilla and Gamera in the same game, because when you make a deal with Toho to buy Godzilla, they will want to make sure a bunch of rules that are followed, and putting Gamera in their universe would break their rules. They would not allow it. Similar, I mean, with the Gamera people, if you couldn't mix those two, right? But that's what people want. They want to mix all these franchises together, right? So I came up with a way to kind of get around this, which is I really look at Legos as a way to do this, or HeroClix if you're really nerdy. With Legos, you can have Batman Legos. Okay, there are Batman Legos. They're licensed. Some of the money when you buy Batman Legos goes to whoever owns Batman, DC Comics, or whatever. And then so Lego is splitting the profits with the Batman franchise. Lego also makes Star Wars Legos, right? Where you're splitting the proceeds with LucasArts. You have Star Wars Legos, okay? No one would ever make a Lego set that was Batman versus Darth Vader, right? You couldn't buy that as a set in the store. But you can buy Batman Legos, and you can buy Legos with Darth Vader, and when you bring them home, you can totally set that up, right? Because you've purchased them separately, and so everyone is able to get their money. And then once you get home, it's just your content. You can do what you want with it. So I'm doing the same thing in a video game. We're going to have a Gamera release where it's only Gamera and his friends, or and enemies. Then we're going to have a Toho release where it's only Godzilla and his friends. We're going to have an original monsters release where it's all original monsters we've put together. We're going to have all these different releases. They're all going to use the same mechanics. They're all going to be part of the same game engine, but they're going to be completely separate games, right? You go in, they each have a single-player mode. They each have a multiplayer mode. They're completely separate. And yet they all use exactly the same underlying mechanics and code. So when you get home and you have all these files on your computer, you can just point the game at all these different files, and all these files will be running at the same time on your machine. It's the same thing as dumping a bunch of Legos in a big bin, and then you don't think about where did these Legos come from, right? You bought them individually, but now they're just part of your collection. Some people talk about DLC, which is a term people are now familiar with and comfortable with. And so I try to explain that what we're talking about here is wildly different from DLC. DLC, downloadable content, there's a game that you buy, right? So you buy Borderlands 2, right? That's a game that you buy. And then you buy DLC. You must buy Borderlands 2 before you can buy any DLC, right? And if someone doesn't have Borderlands 2, they can't play with you. With a modular game design, like we're releasing in separate things, there's no thing you have to buy. Everything is optional, right? I can buy just Godzilla, and then I can buy Godzilla and the originals, and I can play against someone who only has Gamera. They're all completely independent games, which means that you'll be able to play against monsters that you personally don't own. You'll be able to see all this kind of exciting stuff that's out there. And it also gives us the ability to put out a free game. So we're going to have a free game that's going to have only 4 monsters in very limited single-player mode. But so everyone, I mean, there's really no excuse. Everyone should be able to download and play this free game and play as these first 4 monsters. And then you see everything else is going on and be like, oh, I want to buy that too. Be able to do all that really cheaply through the Steam storefront. So there you go. it was driven by this desire to give people what they want. But I think it really just makes everyone win a bunch in the end.
Now, I have to admit, that does sound like a brilliant idea.
Yes.
Now,
I was pretty happy with it.
now, very quickly about the monsters again. With all the designs coming through in the ones that you got listed on the wiki, is there any that stick out in your mind right now that you particularly like the look of?
That I like the look of. Ooh.
Yeah.
It's involved in all of their developments. It's hard for me to be objective about it. I do quite like Katyusha, who is a giant jerboa mouse with some sort of experimental bioorganic death machine grafted onto her body. So we started out with a great concept of a mouse with a jetpack, and this is something people often want. They want something that with some sort of accessory, like a jetpack or a ray gun or something. And then I would say, well, why is that thing big? I mean, making a little jetpack for a mouse, no problem, right? And then the mouse becomes mutated, becomes giant, no problem. But wouldn't they be a giant mouse with a tiny jetpack? Why does the jetpack get huge? And so, that led this whole discussion and this whole, Russian scientist backstory and this, biomechanical thing that grows and feeds off its host. And, I was really pleased with how that one came together. Although, I don't know, I mean, all of our designs I'm really quite proud of. I really feel we've managed to make every single one really distinct and unique. I mean, we have Tornok, who's got sort of an Inuit vibe, who doesn't care about humans but is only protecting the planet and not the humans. And you've got Gandiva, who's sort of a stone mystic golem that's been outfitted with weapons by the Indian government. And I think it's great that we have all these completely different weird monsters all existing in this world.
Now, of course, if someone would want to support the project or submit a design or just join the community, what's the name of the website that they would have to go to?
So there's Sunstone Games. Have our website, of course. It's fairly bare bones, just sunstone.co. From there, you can get into the forums and the main community site is Kaiju Community. That's where all of our forums take place. This is a little hard to say, but if you go to either of those other sites, you'll get through to it. But we also have our design wiki, which is kaijukombat.wiki.zoho.com. But we have all of our design documentation is online, as all of our monster bios and sort of development process and in-game renders, and as we work on the audio of the monsters, those roars get put up and people can vote on which roars they like best and so forth. We're really trying to be super transparent with everything that we're doing and putting all of our assets out there for the fans. So the wiki is the place you can see, everything we've got thus far in the game.
That sounds absolutely brilliant, and sadly, though, that's all the time we got. So thank you very much for coming on the show to talk about your game. You have been a terrific guest.
I'm glad. A terrific host.
Thank you very much. So, ladies and gentlemen, Simon Strange. And I've been Caboos15. Catch you next time.